Welcome to Disgruntled Wargamer. I'm Tom, and today I'm walking you through the build of a Khadoran railcar inspired by the Iron Kingdom's artwork and one of the new Battlegrounds scenarios. Let's take a look at the Iron Kingdoms real quick. Everything here is on a massive scale. The war machines they fight with are huge, and the trains they use to haul their colossal battle engines and warjacks across the country are even more massive than the gun platforms they transport. Everything is larger than life. These images are from Adepticon in 2012, and they serve as a good guide to how large the rail cars need to be. In the new scenario, we're given the size of 12 by 4 inches for the rail car, and that's how I set mine up. My first attempt was this monstrosity. I only have a Mars resin printer from Elegoo, and its platform isn't capable of printing anything this large. I had to slice up my mesh in Blender and try to print it out in pieces. As you can see, I experimented with different ways to set this up. This obviously speaks more to my inexperience with 3D printing rather than the quality of the printer or resin. I attempted to hollow this section out before printing, and it retained resin inside. These pieces were more successful, but I had errors in the mesh, especially at the wheel, where things weren't joined correctly, and the slicer tried its best at translating the bad structure. The wheels ended up with gaps in the axle and the wheel, and even though nobody sees the underside, I still went back and cleaned up that mesh. These sections illustrate the differences in processes that I experimented with. There are a couple of very thick sections here, one that got droopy. I tried all sorts of thicknesses, different support structures, and different exposure settings. I messed myself up in the middle once I got it dialed in a little bit by switching resin from a normal type to a water washable. And wouldn't you know, different resins have different properties, leading to different results. Here is a sped up video of my printer printing. It's doing the wheels, which will be attached to the bottom of the model. I used a blend of supports, starting with some bar supports, adding tree supports, and focusing on the areas where there's a lot of material, adding a larger amount of supports to the point closest to the plate. I'm not sure if this is the most efficient way to support these parts, but it worked for the last couple of print runs, so I'm not about to change it. Once I got the bottom half figured out, I started measuring the gap between the two end pieces for the next blocks of foam to be cut. I used the fence on the foam cutter, and I admit I don't have a proper sled yet. A sheet of MDF works well enough for this type of cut, gliding along the top of the table without catching on the plastic lip. I cut 4 of these strips and glued them together using the end pieces to align them. However, when I clamped them down, I didn't realize I had slipped a little, and they became slightly misaligned. If I were to do a similar project again, I think building a jig for gluing these planks together is probably a good idea. It's worth noting that I'm using the tacky glue here, and I probably could have used hot glue instead. The setup would have been quicker, there wouldn't have been any slipping, but I'm not sure how well it would bond with the flat surface of the resin print. I'll have to test that later, or if somebody knows, they can stick that in the comments on the video. Here's an example of why you should use a sled when you're cutting models on the table. You can see here how the front end of that edge piece gets hung up on the plastic edge of the table. And if I had been using a sled like I normally do, the sled actually extends past the edge of the table, preventing anything from getting hung up like that. The model also got hung up on the back end, and that's because the front and rear end pieces were not completely in alignment with each other. In addition to that, the model was slipping underneath the fence, and that was causing movement along the y-axis in addition to the x-axis. The model is more or less ready for the top pieces to be added, but I think I can do a better job hiding the seams. For the top, I print up a bunch of these plates. They're supposed to look like that anti-skid deck plating with crosshatches on them. The outer rim is studded with rivets. I like using the printer to handle the rivets ahead of time because manually making them and gluing them on is time consuming. It's worth noting how flexible this material is. This is completely cured water washable resin, and it has a lot of play. When you bend the plastic, it doesn't always break. It also has a slight curve to it when it prints, and that's okay because when you glue it down, you can apply some clamps to it and it'll straighten out just fine. Let's rewind a little. I primed the whole thing red using some hardware store primer, and then I mixed up some brown wash in a jar and applied it to the top of the model and anywhere I thought it should look dirty. The hardware store paint is actually a paint primer, so it tends to be resistant to water due to the paint top coat. If the wash has too much water in it, the liquid will just slide around on top of the paint. This can be seen as good or bad depending on your perspective. For me, it means wiping off with my finger is easy to do, and that prevents big mistakes. Of course, this is just dirtying up the model, so as Bob Ross would say, there are no mistakes, just happy accidents, or something like that. Anyway, I like the second model much better than the first. The whole print job is more clean, it's lightweight, and it looks better in so many ways. The detail in the doorways pop more, the sizing is appropriate to the setting, and the little features like the rivet strips and ladders make it so much better. I can do better sizing up the ladders next time. There are other little areas for improvement. Most of it involves me dialing in my resin printer to the resin, and the rest of it involves just simple methodology and not being impatient when I'm trying to do the job. I'm looking forward to trying this again with a rail car for another faction, most likely Signar. I have an idea for a Crucible Guard tanker as well. And if this channel ever hits 1,000 subscribers, I'll do a giveaway, and maybe one of these models can end up in your hands and on your table. Let me know what you think of this build if you want to see more builds like this on the tube, and you can offer suggestions on what to build next in the comments. Thanks for joining, and here's hoping you learn as much on your next project as I did on my last.